Hey guys, it's Dave. Recently, one of you all sent in some questions to me about propagating Hoya, and I've had a bunch of people request a guide to it. I did a propagation video. I have propagated a ton throughout my videos, but I don't have a guide, I guess. Just all the information I have, A to Z, so to speak. So I'm going to do that today, and one of the things I'm going to talk about is how I select Hoya to propagate or not propagate. And especially going into the winter season here in Iowa. I'm going to start with not propagating right now. Stick with me. I spent a ridiculous amount of time in my tent going through plants, trying to decide what to propagate, what I want to propagate but won't propagate, what looks like it's ready to be propagated, but this, that, and the other thing, like an hour. Just ridiculous. I could have just grabbed 5 random plants, but if you saw my tent video, I killed off a lot of growth tips, moving everything out of there for the day and then back in. So it's kind of a bloodbath for growth tips. But I thought here is a perfect example of a plant that I really want to propagate. And if this were spring right now, spring, summer even, I definitely would. This is Hoya species Affinity Lambie. This is one that's got a reputation of being very difficult to grow. Not as difficult as the Lambie, but almost for people in my climate. Let me show you this vein though real quick. Isn't that cool? I love this plant so much. That pterodactyl look. What makes me want to propagate this is, of course, to get more of this plant. It's kind of an expensive plant, and I worked for this plant. I worked hard for this free plant. But what I like about it is it's got a terrific amount of stem here and here to propagate from. The reason I'm not going to do it right now, even though I would be using heat mats, is that we're going to be keeping the house at about 60 degrees overnight, which means the tent will also be 60 degrees overnight. It'll warm up nicely during the day, but this plant wants it warm. So I don't want to cause it any undue trauma by cutting it down to those 2 leaves. It is growing so well. It is doing so beautifully. This is one not to mess with right now. For very different reasons, I am not going to propagate this Ban Nang Nhoi. I'm sure that is not how you pronounce it. Really beautiful leaves. This was a gift from a dear friend, fellow Iowan. It has, through my own fault, I didn't realize how quickly this would grow. It has grown through its wire trellis here and on up here. It has spiraled quite a few times. What would make me kind of want to cut this back is if it didn't have, and let's see how we do getting the nodes on camera, these fat nodes. And here, well, you're not going to be able to see that, I imagine. And here, it has, in other words, along this long vine, a lot of nodes that are just dying to do something. So what I'm going to do is save this for a Hoya trellising video and get this one trellised up, and I know, well, with the certainty that you can know anything, I know this one's going to leaf out and it's going to become a much fuller plant on its own. Then if I want more of this plant in the spring, I can cut from there. Now, if these nodes look kind of deadish, and I'll show you one that we are going to propagate today where the node just clearly isn't going to do anything, I would cut this back way down here. I would propagate this one leaf, and then I would sacrifice all the rest of that new vine because it very unlikely it would do anything anyway. So thought I might propagate this one today, evaluated it, and made the decision that that would not be wise. So here we go on to one we are going to propagate. This one I'm just going to do myself the favor and not try to pronounce. It's just right there on the screen for you. Hopefully you're not just listening to this. As you can see, we have quite a lot of stem in between the base of the plant and where it starts growing again. This node right here doesn't strike me as likely to do anything, and even if it did, you know, there's still a ton of distance in between these two. I imagine this was because I brought this home from my friend's greenhouse and it just did a big stretch, and then it started growing really well up here. What gave me pause on this, and probably why I was standing around in my tent for a freaking hour trying to come up with these plants, besides my basic indecisiveness on what to film, is that it is growing so well up here, and you can see 2 new growth points. It looks fantastic. I could trellis this. No question, that would be the safe way to go. I don't go safe all too often. So I think what we're gonna do is make a cut here and just put this back on the janky support stick, and then take a cut. Well, I'll look at this with you up here to see if we're gonna try to keep that all in one, or more likely two. Let me get my supplies ready and I'll rejoin you in one moment. I get to bring out my trusty bonsai scissors, favorite thing ever. And okay, listen, if you do a lot of propagating or you have a YouTube channel, for the love of Mike, get yourself some sharp scissors. You don't have to use my link that's in the description, but you do need some sharp scissors. Sawing away at the poor cell structure on a stem with your rusty, dull kitchen scissors isn't doing anybody any favors. So that's my PSA today. All right, we're back with our unpronounceable plant. I'm just going to unsnap it, and 4 leaves and 2 growth points. Bold, 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 Dave. So what I'm going to do is start with the cut I want at the base of the plant here. And then I'm just going to pin that back up. It looks really nice. And this is in the grow tent. It's going to remain in the grow tent for the winter, of course. We are left with this. There's a node here where my thumb is. I am not going to try to propagate that. So I'm going to cut it here, perhaps longer than I need it to be, but you can't take back the cut. So for now, I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to cut it a little bit above the node there, so that when that vine dries back, it doesn't potentially dry back into the node. I've never had it die back into the node and kill the plant. Maybe because I usually leave enough. I'm not sure, but not a real issue for me, but that is definitely the safest way to go. And then we have this little umbrella here. There are only 2 things that I ever propagate in, and that is my normal substrate, just those 3 components of cocoa chip, cocoa coir, and number 3 perlite, or I do it in perlite alone. And the only times I really use perlite alone is if I've got kind of a floppy leaf, thin leafed Hoya, like a Boiti or something along that line, maybe a multiflora. And it's rare. It's rare these days that I would do that. I like to grow it directly into the substrate and never have to think about it again until it's time to repot it. Success rate is fantastic. I have heard some people say it's a slower way to go. Let me show you something. Now, this might be a slightly extreme example. You saw this recently, perhaps, in my tent video. This is Hoya magnifica, who since then, which I just did that video a week ago, has put on this new growth here. So that's looking great. 3 weeks ago, this was a cutting, and now this is what the root system looks like. So that's impressive. This went from cutting into the tent, and daytime temperatures are mid-80s, I would say, as is the humidity. So it's almost exactly equal, 86 degrees, 86% humidity, for instance. So pretty ideal conditions. At this time of year, cooling off as it is, I'm probably going to take every one of these cuttings and put it in a prop box, which is more like it is 100% humidity, and it's on a heat mat, which makes an enormous difference. So that leads into a question viewer had. Let me fill up a pot here and then we'll get to that. I picked 3 containers that I use routinely. How I determine which one I'm going to use is, one, am I going to use perlite or am I going to use the soil substrate? I'll call Coco Coir soil for the sake of conversation. And if I know, how quickly does it root? How aggressively does it root? They're going to be plants like serpens or things like that that have really delicate root systems. Then they're going to be plants like the Magnifica, which clearly there's nothing delicate about that plant. That is a Girl Gone Wild for sure. If I take more cuttings of that plant, it might be tempting to just put 2 nodes in one, maybe 3 or 4 inch pot. Like this one is a 3-inch pot. This looks like it might be 2 inches, whatever these little sippy cups are. I kind of have been liking these. A friend sent me a Hypoplasia and it came in this, and they're sold at Dollar Tree. $1.25 a pack. I think there's 6 of them. Put some holes in it, of course, for drainage. And it's got a wide mouth to it, but it is very narrow, and I think that would suit this very well, because for me, this has not been a plant that just did crazy rooting over the summer. It rooted fine, it rooted well, but it does not need a particularly large container. So I'm going to put both of them in here. And let me gently set that down. You have to kind of determine how strong the stem is, and it's not terribly strong. So this is not like one of the plants we'll be doing in a minute where I would just feel comfortable stabbing it into the substrate. This is a little bit more delicate. I will work the substrate around this. I forgot to grab the rooting powder. I'll be right back. I'm going to use this to cauterize and sterilize the cut I just made. I think a lot of you know that I did a test last year using this, and there's absolutely no difference at all in how quickly the plant rooted. But that's just one rooting powder and one person testing it. Where I have erred time and time and time again is making this too dense, the mix I would put in this container. I can't tell you how many plants have been stunted because those delicate little roots just couldn't push through the compacted Coco Coir. So don't be me. See how chunky that is? Now, of course, Coco Coir will sift down and fill in some of those air gaps, and that's where I sort of let myself down. I will grab a handful of this, hold on to the chunks, and the Coco Coir will sift through my hands, and that's what I'll end up with in here. So I'm trying to be mindful to not do that, but I'm still me. Let me back up. Here's an important fact about Hoya. Now, there are exceptions to this, like the multiflora will actually root from the bottom of the cut, but this is going to root from along this entire stem. You do not have to bury this node. So if this is too long, which it is, I'm going to start that over just a little bit. If more likely though, if leaves are in the way to get all the way down to the substrate, that's fine. I do it when I can because having the node in contact with the substrate means more roots. More roots is better, of course. But if it doesn't go that way, it's fine. And, you know, if you come from the aeroid world where you've got to have that node sunk, that might be a little bit different. So I don't worry too much about how it's going to land in the pot. I have 4 leaves, which is not going to make it easy for me. Oh, never mind. I always think things are going to be harder than they actually are. I will just load this up. I have to have some Coco Coir in there, not just chunks. For my growing conditions, I wish I could just grow in chunks. I would. That would definitely be my preference. If I lived in Florida, maybe. and I watered them outside, that's something I would consider. And then gently set that down because they'll pop right back out. I will use clips to secure them, and as I always say when I'm doing this, it doesn't work well in this dry mix that's so chunky, but once it's watered in, they hold great. And it's not like if the substrate dries, they'll pop out. I will be keeping the substrate, pardon me, the prop box will be keeping the substrate moist while it roots. Then it will be rooted and we won't need these anymore. So it's just a matter of one time watering it in and then they're good to go. So simple as that. You can use bobby pins, you can use pieces of wire. I just like these because they're very easy to pull out. All right, I got that watered in. It's gonna look a little weird off to the front of that container, but that's a temporary situation. It'll be repotted soon enough. One of the questions I got was, do I have to use a prop box or is it just for the humid loving plants? I did a little experiment this summer, so let's forget about winter for right now, of trying to, well, I think it was a space thing, call it an experiment after the fact. Rooting Hoya just in room conditions where very warm room, the humidity was good, not, you know, profoundly humid, but good humidity, and the rooting was mediocre at best. And I ended up switching those to the tent and prop boxes. I just bought more prop boxes. And then they very quickly rooted up. And so I would say, for me, prop box always, you know, something to increase the humidity is going to increase your chances of success and certainly the speed. Another question I got was, do you have to have leaves on the vine to propagate? Let's cut off a vine of this Marili. You know what, this is kind of a thin vine. I've got another one set aside. Let me cut off one of its vines real quick. This is a sturdier vine. So no, the answer is no. You don't have to have leaves on your vine to propagate it. That's called a wet stick. So you would just cut in between the nodes. Doubtful that'll show up, but you would just cut in between the nodes. So the node is right here, and lay this on something, your moistened perlite or whatever. Humid, but not too humid, or you will rot this. I am told I've never, and I mean 0% success, trying to propagate Hoya wet sticks. I have a friend, Crazy Plant Gal, I talk about all the time. She does it successfully all the time. I have never had one succeed. So it clearly can be done by people who aren't me. Plants like this are like my favorite. My least favorite plants to propagate are like the Monstera siltepecano with those fine stems, and you've got to get a whole bunch of them together to even make it worth propagating and trying to get the I hate it. I hate it. But big, thick stemmed Hoya, make some cuts here. You're just in like flying. You can make little plants so easily. You group three of these together like this, you're gonna have, well, not, maybe not quite like that, but you're gonna have a great little plant. It's gonna take no time at all. If you have local plant swaps, this is just a great way to engage in that kind of deal if you like to leave your house or whatever. I've heard people like do that. I don't know. Maybe you're one of them. But, you know, these are little bitty leaves. I'm chopping this plant up proper. So I wanted to show you another aspect of propagating, and that's, you know, I've got this bit of stem down here, and I've got all of these leaves. I'm going to sacrifice some. So a Hoya node, you may or may not know, has kind of an infinite lifespan. It can continue to put out leaves. So don't feel bad about cutting a leaf off, but that's a lot of life to support while it's rooting. My guess is that for this particular plant, that's going to be okay. This is a really durable, fast-growing, fast-rooting plant. On that heating mat, the roots spread so very quickly. Well, let me show you one I did recently. You can see how well that roots through there, and you can also see what a large container I used for this. I did a whole bunch of them in containers this big, and they're all growing beautifully. Lots of new growth on them. Well, every single one of them has new growth points, new vines in several cases. So not concerned about that at all. Let me take a couple more cuts. We'll get these potted up. So sacrifice that big leaf, and there's another plant. That's fantastic. It's perfect. So I will get those set up. For these, I might use a 3-inch container. These are incredibly sturdy, and instead of trying to get it stuck straight down into a container, it's fine to turn it. The stem, there's no reason it can't be at an angle. Just whatever would help you balance the plant. And so in this case, the leaves themselves will balance the plant, and then that little plant pin is just going to be the icing on the Hoya cake. All right, so start it off with some of the good stuff, and then just get it in however I can. There we go. I don't pack it in, but just kind of just gently but firmly. Is that the saying? And you want to make sure that under those big leaves that you're not leaving gaping holes. So just check for that. I'm putting my thumb on the stem to hold this in place. Otherwise it would pop right out. Grab a plant pin, water this through, and I'll be right back. And when I say water it through, I mean I really soak this substrate. So it's not like a little gentle sprinkle. It's like trying to drown it kind of watering. With only a few exceptions, I will propagate year-round. Species Affinity Lambie and its ilk, those heat-loving plants, I'll just leave alone. My house gets too cold, we turn the furnace down too low at night, it's an old house, it's drafty, I live in Iowa, etc. and so forth. But for anything else, sure, I'll take a propagation, I'll put it in a prop box with a seedling mat. I wouldn't even think about trying to propagate without a seedling mat over the winter. And then into the tent, depending on what plant it is, if there's room, or in a prop box for the winter. And I've had great success doing that. I do not propagate in water anymore. One, I've had not great success with it, but two, in really cold environments like I have, it's been incredibly unsuccessful, even with a heating mat. A heating mat only raises the temperature so far. So you couldn't have a heating mat under your plants at 100 degrees to raise the temperature from 60 to 80, for instance. You would fry the plants. So they're warm, but not scaldingly hot. And with water, it will not heat up the water enough. So that's out for me. You want good light over your propagations, no question about that. And they're going to grow into little plants very quickly. It's going to go from a cutting to a plant within 10, 14 days, something like that. And it'll start putting off new growth likely. And I start treating it like a plant right then and there. As it's rooting, I start feeding it. And I use the Michigan State University, again, linked in my description if you want to know exactly what I use. And I don't dilute it. I use it exactly as it's written on the package. I've been doing that a long time. I've had really good success with it. I'm not going to change it now. I hope for those of you new to Hoya, this was helpful. If you stuck with me, even though you're a really skilled Hoya grower, and there are a lot on this channel, appreciate you being here. Come join me again in the next one real soon, okay? Bye-bye.